James Acton is the co-director of the Nuclear Policy Program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. He joins us now live. Mr. Acton, I really appreciate you taking time to be here tonight. Thank you.
Thanks for having me on.
So Ukraine is reportedly starting a big counteroffensive against Russia. There's new State Department data that shows that Russia really is running terrifying camps inside Russia, to which they apparently are forcibly deporting lots of Ukrainian civilians. I mean, the headlines are all very worrying. There's a lot to worry about in the Russia-Ukraine war. As a nuclear expert, though, I want to take your temperature, basically, as to how worried you are that we might have a nuclear accident or a radiation disaster at this huge nuclear plant in Zaporizhia.
Well, I'm genuinely worried about that. A nuclear power plant is simply not designed to be in the middle of a war zone. I think people have an image of a missile hitting the core of a reactor and dispersing radiation. That's very unlikely. But the big problem is there's all of the cooling equipment for the plant, which is potentially exposed and vulnerable. And deliberately or accidentally, that could be hit in a war, sparking an accident sequence that leads to a large release of radiation.
So the cooling equipment, which, again, this is a plant that makes power, but the plant requires power in part to keep its cooling equipment going. Can you just explain why that's such a point of vulnerability?
Yeah, so the core of a reactor produces very large amounts of radioactivity. That becomes very hot, and that heat has to be taken somewhere. And so you need to, of this kind of nuclear power plant, you need to be cooling it actively. So you have electricity connections to the outside world. In the event that those fail, you have emergency diesel generators on site. Zaporizhia is also connected to a thermal power plant, something like coal or gas that's an extra source of electricity. Hot water from inside the plant is basically sprayed up in the air in so-called spray ponds. In fact, you can just see them there on screen right now in order to cool it before that water is recycled. All of this critical equipment related to cooling is outside of the core of the plant. And one can imagine, as I say, an accident sequence perhaps involving shelling and fires and firefighters being unable to get to the site that could lead to the destruction of this equipment, heat buildup in the core, and eventually what we saw in Fukushima with the melting of nuclear fuel and then the dispersal of radiation.
Briefly, Mr. Acton, are you hopeful about the UN investigators, IAEA investigators who are arriving at the plant this week?
I'm very glad the UN is going in, the IAEA is going in rather, but we shouldn't be, we should be realistic about what they can achieve. They're inspectors. It's their job to report on what's going on in the plant, to assess the safety and security features on the plant and to report back. They don't have a magical way of defending the plant or repairing broken equipment. And so, ultimately it's up to Russia to behave responsibly, to agree to demilitarize the area around the plant. Unfortunately, given the fact that Russia's already invaded Ukraine and illegally occupied the plant, I'm not optimistic that Russia is going to start behaving responsibly at this juncture.